Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome. We'll get started in about a minute. We'll wait for people to file in and join us. Okay, I see a decent amount of people have joined us, so um, let's get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar titled Family Support for LGBTQ plus Young People. My name is Alana Powers O'Brien, and I'm the Research and Program Specialist here at the Family Online Safety Institute. For those of you who don't know, the Family Online Safety Institute, also known as FOSI for short, is a 501(c)(3) nonprofit organization with the goal of creating safer online worlds for kids and their families. Our work touches many areas, including enlightened public policy, industry best practices, youth-informed research, and digital parenting guidance. This particular webinar is a special one as we're co-hosting with Born This Way Foundation to discuss their recent research and resources focused on LGBTQ plus young people, both on and offline. The goal of this webinar is to discuss what community looks like for LGBTQ plus young people and how we can work together to create an online and offline world that helps them not just survive, but also thrive. So to go through a little bit of the logistics for today, during the first part of the webinar, two members from Born This Way Foundation will give a presentation about LGBTQ plus young people's digital and in real life communities. About halfway through our time here, I'll moderate a discussion based on this presentation. And then the final 10 minutes will be reserved for audience Q&A. So please feel free to put your questions in the Q&A box throughout the discussion as they come to your mind, and then we'll try to answer them in those final 10 minutes. Now, I would like to invite Fran Giantasio, Manager of Research and Clinical Knowledge at Born This Way Foundation, to introduce herself and the organization. Fran, I'll turn it over to you.
Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here today. My name is Fran Giantasio. I use she, her pronouns, and I am Manager of Research and Clinical Knowledge at Born This Way Foundation. For those of you who don't know, Born This Way Foundation was co-founded by Lady Gaga and her mother, Cynthia Bissett Germanata, to empower and inspire young people to build a kinder, braver world that supports their mental health and well-being. I'm really looking forward to sharing more about our youth-engaged approach to research and how families can support LGBTQ plus young people. Before we get started, I'd love to hand it over to Dylan and Farah to introduce themselves.
Hi, my name is Dylan Denza. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm on the Youth Advisory Board for Born This Way Foundation. I assist with a lot of their programming. I'm also an artist, and I was born and raised in Richmond, Virginia, and I'm currently based in Los Angeles. Farah, if you want to introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Farah Dotis. I'm the president of PFLAG Los Angeles. PFLAG, in case anyone doesn't know, is a 50-year-old organization, I think possibly the oldest LGBTQ plus allyship organization. We exist so that parents, friends, family, and allies can support the LGBTQ plus people in their lives. And I am actually currently based in Los Angeles too.
Awesome. Thank you both. So here's what you can expect for today's session. We'll go over some objectives for our webinar. I will give some background on Born This Way Foundation's research and our recent research with Hope Lab. I'll provide key definitions, key statistics, and talk to you all a little bit about the methodology behind how we came up with these recommendations. Then I will pass it over to Dylan to go over recommendations that come from LGBTQ plus young people and adult experts and how families can best support them. Then we know that mistakes are a normal part of relationships. So we'll talk a little bit about what to do if you make a mistake and how to foster repair. We'll go over some key takeaways and share our resource guide, which will include all the information we go over today, and then we'll open it up for panel discussion. So welcome. Today we aim to create a non-judgmental space to share research findings and discuss how families can best support LGBTQ plus young people in person and online. So a little bit of background on Born This Way Foundation's research approach. We use a youth-engaged research strategy, which means we include young people at every step of the research process. So we develop our survey instruments alongside young people, we collect data from young people, and then we contextualize that data with them and work with them to disseminate and implement our findings back into their communities. So as part of the research team, we ensure that all of our initiatives are grounded in scientific rigor. But we really take the lead of youth voices in determining what topics are meaningful to them, what's going to resonate with their community, and what's going to create sustainable solutions. So our goals for today's session. You will come to understand key statistics from Born This Way Foundation's and Hope Lab's recent research on LGBTQ plus young people in online spaces. Through this webinar, we hope that you'll identify 1 to 2 recommendations that you can use to support LGBTQ plus young people in your life. And then lastly, we'll leave you with some trusted resources to explore for further support. So here's a little bit of background on our collaboration with Hope Lab. So back in May of 2024, Born This Way Foundation and Hope Lab set out to conduct research to better understand LGBTQ plus young people's experiences in online spaces. So through our survey development, we interviewed LGBTQ plus young people and adult experts, and we actually asked them, what are the key topics that are important for us to explore in this work? What are the questions that we should be asking? So we took their feedback and then we developed our survey instrument, and we launched that survey in August of last year. And we collected responses from over 1,200 LGBTQ plus young people. About half of our sample identified as trans or gender expansive young people, and half of our sample identified as LGBTQ plus young people of color. In March of 2025, we launched our report findings, and we held an event at Bard High School Early College where we brought together LGBTQ plus young people and adult experts to really talk about how we can take this research and turn it into action. So what we learned from that event was that LGBTQ plus young people wanted to see this research and these resources in the hands of 3 audiences: family members, tech and social media companies, and active allies. So in response, we launched 3 resource guides. The first in May of this year, our resource guide for families of LGBTQ plus young people, which we'll be talking about today. The second we launched in August, our resource guide for tech and social media companies. And then later this month, we'll be releasing our final resource guide for active allies. Alongside these resource guides, we wanted to better understand some of the intersectional identity factors. So we released 2 research briefs in collaboration with Hope Lab, one of which focused on LGBTQ plus young people specifically living in rural communities, and the second focused on trans young people. So before we get into what our findings and what we found from our research, I want to go over some key definitions for our webinar today. So first, when we talk about families, we're including parents, guardians, caregivers, siblings, any member that's a part of an LGBTQ young person's life. Family may be biological, it can also be chosen family members. LGBTQ plus, as an acronym, if you don't know, stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and questioning. The plus is added at the end to recognize all identities beyond heterosexual and cisgender. And then lastly, transgender, or trans for short, describes people whose gender identity differs from the sex they were assigned at birth. Okay, so what did we find from our survey? Overwhelmingly, LGBTQ plus young people express a desire for family members to create safe and affirming environments. They also want their families to understand the importance of online communities and to help them navigate them safely. So here are some key statistics for family members. LGBTQ plus young people with access to in-person spaces that supported their identity had lower rates of depressive symptoms compared to those without access to support in in-person spaces. So that was 28% compared to 53%. So this underscores the importance of in-person spaces in supporting the mental health of LGBTQ plus young people. 63% of LGBTQ plus young people perceived their online friends as supportive compared to just 33% of LGBTQ plus young people who perceived their family as supportive. 44% of LGBTQ plus young people feel very safe in online spaces compared to just 9% in person. And 29% of transgender young people reported high levels of family support compared to 43% of cisgender young people. So, while these statistics may be jarring, they underscore that we all have a role to play in creating safe and supportive in-person spaces for LGBTQ plus young people. And what actually happened when we brought these statistics back to young people and we asked them, what do you make of these? They talked about how they want their family members to connect with them in ways that feel affirming, and they actually desire for family members to be curious and open-minded about the ways they seek and receive support online. Okay, so in a moment, I'm going to turn it over to Dylan to talk about the actionable recommendations that you all can take as family members. But before that, I want to provide a little context on how this data was collected and how we came to these recommendations. So what we did after we gathered our data is we collected focus groups with LGBTQ plus young people across the country in partnership with Centerlink. These focus groups were led by Dr. Alvin Tran at the University of New Haven, and they focused on how to turn our research findings into action. Similarly, at the discussion tables at our event at Bard High School Early College, which I mentioned earlier, we brought together experts from academia, legislators, representatives from community organizations, and LGBTQ plus young people to discuss actionable strategies that families can take. So we took all of this data, we synthesized it, and from that, we created our recommendations, which Jillian is going to share.
All right, so here are our actionable recommendations. First, be engaged, curious, and open-minded. Practice active listening when speaking to young people about their sexual orientation or gender identity. Ask open-ended, non-judgmental questions about what their identity means to them, and be accepting of their readiness to respond. Asking things like, is there anything you would like me to know about your identity? But also at the same time, don't push. People will tell you what they want you to know if you give them the opportunity to do so. Affirm their identity exploration. Families can show willingness to support by affirming their loved one's gender expression and sexuality. One way to do this is by using their preferred pronouns and sharing your own. And then take the initiative to learn. LGBTQ plus young people value when their family members seek resources and education about the LGBTQ plus community on their own accord. Taking personal initiative to educate yourself about the LGBTQ plus community demonstrates your own investment to learning and relieves the burden of educating others from the LGBTQ plus young people. Another thing, express interest in LGBTQ plus online communities, engage young people in conversation about the online spaces that they're a part of. While LGBTQ plus young people don't expect family members to understand every aspect of their online lives, showing genuine interest can make a meaningful impact. So be genuinely interested in your kids' online friends, like treat them as if you would treat their friends at school. So, what if I make a mistake? Mistakes are inevitable. They're going to happen. As Hannah Montana so wisely said, everybody makes mistakes. So, these are our recommendations for you. So, first, apologize, acknowledge your mistake. A simple I'm sorry can go a long way. Listen, invite your loved one to talk about how your actions impacted them. Listen and validate their experience. And then lastly, find opportunities to reconnect. Ruptures can create opportunities for reconnection and promising to learn more and do better next time. So these are some example scripts of things you can say if you do make a mistake. That did not land how I intended. I'm really sorry about that. I can see how that made you feel uncomfortable, or I'd love to attend the Pride event that you're interested in. And this last one is a great example of reconnecting and doing better for next time. And it's also an example of one of the actionable items that we discussed earlier about showing investment in the person's interests.
So if we can leave you all with 3 key takeaways from our research in this report, it would be that online communities are critical for LGBTQ plus young people to both receive and give support. LGBTQ plus young people want their families to be curious about their online lives. And then lastly, as family members, you can support LGBTQ plus young people in your life by affirming identity exploration and taking initiative to learn more. And you might ask, how can I learn more? So luckily, we've put together a resource guide for family and caregivers of LGBTQ plus young people, which includes all the recommendations we talked about today, as well as the key statistics and several other organizations that are already doing this work that we feel are trusted and can be helpful for further learning. So that will be included in the chat. And without further ado, we'll transition to the panel discussion.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Fran and Dylan, for that presentation. I feel like we all learned a lot, and I have a lot of questions to dive into now. So to kick off this panel, Farah, I actually want to start with you. So we haven't heard from you yet. Not only do you do amazing work with PFLAG LA, but you're also a parent. So from both of those perspectives, I'd like to turn this first question over to you and ask, what's one thing that you've seen be successful with parents and caregivers when supporting their LGBTQ plus children, both in person and online?
Thanks for that, Alana. Yes, absolutely. So what I would say is, jumping off what Dylan and Fran were talking about in terms of flexibility and willingness to try, I think what I have seen as being the main, what do you call it, kind of turning point in when a family member or a caregiver really kind of starts to explore with their child or their family member is really an acknowledgement and validation that they are on their own journey as well, just alongside their LGBTQ plus family member. They have to accept that this is a new pathway in their journey, probably unexpected, I'm going to say, and that it's time to steer in the direction with their loved one, because they are their loved one. They want to support them, and they want to maintain this relationship, I would think, going forward. And also I would say that they would also be doing work separately from their loved one. It's not always about the interactions directly with your child or loved one. It's about the work that you do separately, away and just processing all of the information.
Yeah, it's a journey for everyone involved. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much for that, Farah.
Mm-hmm.
And then Francesca, I want to turn this next question over to you. Um, You mentioned the resource that Born This Way Foundation has about focused on how these results can translate to actionable items within tech companies specifically. So I was wondering if you could give us a little bit more information on that and what can tech companies really do to help create a safe environment for LGBTQ plus teens on their platforms. And then beyond just a safe environment, how can LGBTQ plus teens really flourish on these platforms?
Yeah, so that's a great question. The young people that we surveyed actually had a lot of thoughts surrounding what tech and social media leaders can do to create safer, more inclusive, and supportive environments. I want to share 2 findings that really speak to the safety aspect, and then I'll share 2 more findings that speak to creating environments where they can flourish. So The first finding is that 87% of the LGBTQ plus young people that we surveyed said that they value a platform's reputation for being LGBTQ plus friendly. So platforms can think about how they can boost their reputation, whether that's through inclusive community guidelines, representation, or taking concerns reported by young people seriously. The second finding to do with safety has to do with moderation. So 74% of LGBTQ plus young people considered formal online moderation important. So young people actually want their online spaces to be moderated effectively. They don't want tech and social media leaders to limit their expression of identity, but they do want hate speech and discrimination to be addressed appropriately. So that's another thing that platforms can think about. In terms of flourishing, when we think about flourishing, we have to provide affirmative spaces for identity exploration. So what we learned from our research is that LGBTQ plus young people are using online spaces to try out things like new pronouns or to explore identity expression, and a lot of times for the first time. So we have to make sure that these spaces are a safe place to do so. The second thing in terms of flourishing is that tech and social media companies can work with local LGBTQ plus organizations who are already helping young people flourish. And of course, through compensation and consulting with those organizations and with the young people and at them and involving those young people in creating sustainable solutions.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. So, really going past just the basics and making sure it's a flourishing environment, I think is really important because we see for a lot of young people that these online spaces are a place for experimentation and learning more about their identity and new interests and things too. So, thank you so much for those recommendations, Fran. And speaking of support, LGBTQ plus young people also get a lot of support from their online friends. That was a finding that's shown through in your presentation and the report as a whole as well. Sometimes it's even more so than their in-person friends, and sometimes it's a lot more than their communities, schools, and families as well. Um, can you talk a bit more about this finding, Fran, and why you think this might be the case?
Absolutely. So we learned that LGBTQ plus young people not only feel safer online and in person, but they feel as though they're able to get more support online. And specifically for trans and gender expansive young people, they were actually twice as likely to share their identity online compared to in person. So online spaces offer this space to seek and receive support and sort of an opportunity to feel open, maybe before they feel comfortable in person. Um, and we discussed this finding with LGBTQ plus young people, and what they said was not that they don't want support from family members or from in-person friends. That's actually very important, and they want those spaces to feel improved and more affirming. And they're actually quite appreciative of when family members show curiosity about their online communities. But lastly, what I'll say about this finding is that digital spaces are nuanced. So we did hear about belonging and great communities online, but we also heard about frequent cyberbullying. So there is work to be done in online spaces as well. But what's most important is that we kind of all have a role to play in making all young people, including LGBTQ plus young people, feel safer in person and online.
Yeah, it's that old saying, it takes a village. And I think that goes not only to in-person raising children, but also online experiences as well. And something that we love to say at FOSI is, talk early and talk often about these online experiences because it is something that kids want to talk about with their parents. And also, the earlier you can get used to having those discussions, the better the long-term outcomes are as well. So thank you so much for those recommendations. And then Dylan, from a young person's perspective, I'd love to hear about your more personal experiences about getting support online and maybe even in person as well.
Yeah, so I think that because, queer people are such a small percentage of the population, it's a lot easier to find concentrated spaces online than in person. Like when I was in high school, I was the only gay guy in my grade. Like I did not know, many other queer people in real life. And I have been fortunate enough to have, supportive in-person friends, But growing up, I knew a lot of people that sought out online connection because they didn't have support from friends or families, and they would go home and talk to online friends instead of talking to their families because they just didn't have that community in real life. So I think it is a lot easier to find people that you have things in common with online, um, because it's easier to find these concentrated groups.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Dylan. And I want to pose the same question to you, Farah. What about your personal experiences that you've seen within your family and your life as well?
Sure, of course. Yeah, like Dylan, my child who is non-binary and neurodivergent, there really were no trans or gender expansive people at their high school. And maybe three, and literally it'd be three out of thousands of children. So yeah, it was just very hard for them to connect with people in person. And these are people that they had history with in terms of they grew up with these people, went to elementary school with them. So I think when they found their online community, that community met them where they were at that point in their life and took them for who they were in their text verbal expressions, and I do think for an online community in a way it is closer or more intimate in that it's really like your interior self meeting other people's interior selves as opposed to all this like visual and extra baggage basically that we have in person. I mean, hopefully at a certain point you can make in-person relationships work and all that as well. But I do think it's a very important way, especially for queer kids, to be able to connect and just feel comfortable and, breathe a sigh of relief at meeting others who like see them basically.
Yeah, I really love that expression, interior selves. I think we often see the online world as we were saying earlier, as this place to really explore identity and even like a third part of your identity that exists outside your in-person relationships. And that can be really beneficial for everyone and for teens as well. And the hope is maybe sometimes these online relationships turn into in-person friendships as well, and they already have that background of being online friends as well. So thank you so much for sharing those experiences. So another thing I wanted to talk about, Francesca, you mentioned in the slides, what to do if somebody makes a mistake. So if you make a mistake when you're having conversations with an LGBTQ plus young person in your life, how can we apply this sort of scenario to somebody who maybe has made a mistake online? Um, and Dylan, I wanted to start with you and get your advice here.
Yeah, I would say there are a few main things to think about when you make a mistake online. Apologize, be willing to learn and do better next time, and also realize that it's not about you. I had a friend who came out and her mother kind of made it all about her, and she like positioned herself as the victim, saying things like, "You sprung this on me, and it's going to take a lot for me to adjust to this," which are valid feelings, but she kind of made it about herself instead of about the person that was coming out. So I would say own up to your mistakes, but realize that it's about the person. I think we see a lot of this when it comes to people using the correct pronouns. I think you don't have to make it a bigger deal than it is. You don't have to put somebody on the spot, but realize that that you made a mistake, apologize for the mistake, and promise to do better next time.
Yeah, and an apology can go a long way, I think, as well. So thank you for sharing that. And it seems like there's a lot of parallels between what to do if this happens in person and if it happens online as well. And as Farah mentioned before, we're all on our own journeys, and mistakes can be corrected. So thank you so much for sharing that, Dylan. And then another area that we really dove into in the report, maybe not so much in the presentation, but LGBTQ plus people's mental health. So this report found that lower community support for LGBTQ young people is linked to worsening mental health and well-being challenges among that particular community. So Fran, I want to turn it back over to you to talk about this finding and how online communities can help buffer this impact as well.
Yeah. So, as we've been talking about, online communities offer this sense of belonging and inclusiveness, right? And that's particularly important for LGBTQ plus young people, especially in today's climate. And what we learned from our research briefs that went more into intersectional factors is that especially for LGBTQ plus young people living in rural areas, they may not have access to representation in their communities or sort of a broader community they can rely on. So, with that research brief, we found that actually, despite living in these areas, young people reported high levels of pride, like very high, like 86%, and a strong connection to the broader LGBTQ plus community. And that was because of their connection to online spaces. So online spaces really do offer an important buffer when we think about mental health. Of course, we all should strive for in-person spaces as well, that are supportive, but when that's not available, online spaces do have something really important to offer.
Yeah, it almost turns into a third space for people who might not have that in-person third space. So thank you so much for sharing that, Fran. And I'm looking at the clock. I see we're at 12:30. So I just want to remind everyone, if you have questions for the panelists, feel free to put them in the Q&A box and we'll be sure to answer them at the end. But I actually want to pose a similar question to Dylan. So, how have you experienced or witnessed this topic in your world? So, what has your online community done to support the mental health of you or your peers?
I would say that my online community has done a lot to support my own mental health. So I grew up in a small town outside of Richmond, Virginia. There was not like an LGBTQ center. There was not like that kind of community there. So when I first started going like on the internet, realizing that I'm not alone, not only in what I'm experiencing, but in who I am, that there are other people like me was really important to me. For example, like my faith has always been really important to me, and finding a community of queer people of faith online had been super impactful to me growing up, and knowing that there are people like me, that there's not one way to be queer, there's not one way to be religious. And then in terms of my peers and I, beyond like the serious topics of mental health and like being there for each other during a crisis, I think finding community about things we have in common had been really impactful. A lot of my online friends came from like musicians fan groups, like Lady Gaga's fan group. So having fun and light things to talk about has been super important in building community for me. I think a lot of the times people underestimate the value of fun in mental health.
Yeah, that's really wonderful, Dylan. I'm so glad that you were able to find that community and that intersectional community as well. That's really beautiful. And Farah, I want to pose a similar question to you. What has your online community done to support your mental health, but also what has your child's online community maybe done to support their mental health as well? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. My child's online community has been amazing. And I think really without that community, I don't even want to think about where they might be. And what's fantastic about the online community too is that my child was able to find support internationally almost immediately. Like these are people that they would never have met in real life, and hopefully they will soon at some point. But you know, just they have two great friends in South America, one in Asia, and they chat all the time and really are able to commiserate on different things, or help one another with their experiences. I would say for me, in terms of being a mom, I think as a parent, you do get very involved in a more local setting because you're just on the ground raising your children in various communities and schools. So I have a better like in-person network to pull from, draw from. But what has helped with online, certainly in terms of just support groups for myself, because as a parent on your own journey, you need your own support. You need to ask questions of people who are not your child. Don't put everything on them, basically. But just support groups, the fact that Zoom exists now and you can be chatting with people, generally nationally. Internationally is a little harder because although there is a woman who Zooms in from New Zealand, so I take that back. But yeah, like just the expansion of community, the idea that it doesn't always have to be your neighbor or people in person. You can share experiences internationally as well and just feel connected.
Yeah, and that's sort
Mhm.
of the internet at its best, right? When
Yeah.
when everyone is connected and the hypothetical borders are down as well. So I think that could be really impactful. And it seems like a main theme throughout this conversation has been the connection that the online world can bring and how it can work in a variety of different ways for support, whether that be mental health or just bonding or answering those questions as well. So thank you all for sharing that. Um, it wouldn't be a FOSI webinar if we didn't bring up policy in some way or another. So I want to pose the next question. We'll start with you, Dylan, but there has been a lot of talk lately and a lot of legislation as well at the state level about smartphone bans in schools, as well as social media bans for specifically younger teenagers. Um, when thinking about everything that we've talked about, everything that really came out in the report as well, how could such policies affect the LGBTQ plus community specifically? And what type of guidance do you have for policymakers who are thinking of implementing those types of restrictions? And Dylan, feel free to just speak to your personal experience, and we'll turn to Fran for a more general answer as well.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, so I think that there is a fine line between helpful and harmful when it comes to these kinds of things. Um, I think that, younger teenagers are going to find their ways onto social media no matter what. So the priority should be more of making these platforms safe for people. I think on one hand, finding community online had been really helpful for me as a teenager. I started going on like Tumblr and Instagram in high school, which was a lot later than most of my friends. I was kind of late to the social media game, but through these websites, I mentioned finding community, but I also learned so much about queer culture. And I found out that I had so much in common with people online that I didn't have in common with people in real life. On the other hand, I think queer people, especially queer kids, are more susceptible to certain problems such as substance use, eating disorders, and predatory behavior. I knew people who were underage, and when they didn't have support in their families, they turned to like hookup apps and started meeting older people, or turned to unhealthy like substances to cope. So I think it's it's a very fine line. I know there are also like, blogs dedicated to like eating disorders and thinspo and skipping meals. So a lot of the times when people feel like they don't have control in their life, they turn to these, unhealthy practices. So I think a lot of it does go back to content moderation, and doing things from that end as opposed to blocking people from accessing these websites because they're going to get on them, no matter what.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for that, Dylan. And I just want to take a moment to acknowledge that there are those more serious harms that can occur online, and there are resources available. I'm thinking specifically through the Trevor Project and through NCMEC as well. And maybe we can have somebody from the FOSI backend pull a few of those resources and add a link into the chat as well. But I think we hear that sentiment a lot that. Young people will still maybe find a way to access the internet, and maybe it'll be less safe if they're doing it behind their teachers or parents' backs and things like that. So I think that's an important point to consider when potentially enacting this legislation. Fran, as I mentioned, I'd love to get your more general take on this topic, and what advice or guidance would you have for policymakers who are thinking about implementing these types of restrictions, such as a smartphone ban or a social media ban as well?
Yeah, so as Dylan illustrated, digital spaces are very nuanced. And what we're finding with the research is that more and more it's pointing to how young people use technology as being more important than how much they use it. So, to Dylan's point, like what are you engaging with online? And is that supporting your mental health? But I think the most important thing, especially for us at Born This Way Foundation, is that we really feel strongly that young people should be a part of the conversation to craft policies that make sense in schools. So, similar to the way we conducted this survey with a youth engaged approach, including young people at every step and engaging them as part of the solution can enhance policies and make sure that not only are they effective, but they're sustainable.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Fran. And as someone who's been conducting some youth engaged research as of late, I've been referencing this report and Hope Lab and Born This Way Foundation's other reports basically nonstop, because you are the pinnacle of that work in this field. So thank you so much for that. And it's really important, I think, that we involve young people in decisions that we're making about them. And I think that's something that's really important to keep in mind for legislators and others who are thinking about enacting these types of policies as well. Um, to start to wrap up this discussion, so we can move to the Q&A. I see a few questions coming in, which is great as well. What resource stands out to you the most for LGBTQ plus young people, parents, and allies navigating the digital world and their mental health and things like that? And Farah, I wanted to start with you.
All right, thank you. I I feel terrible tooting our own horn, but I do think we've done really good work. PFLAG, the chapter I'm part of is Los Angeles, but we are a national organization, been around for 50 years, so we have a lot of content and resources available. So I do think PFLAG has done some really great work, especially more recently. They are really updating a lot of their resources, content, engaging young people, making sure that the experience really is about parents and caregivers and friends, but also, involving the queer community as a whole, because um, everyone can learn something from everyone else, basically. And especially when parents, I mean, I'll speak from my experience. When I was, when my child came out to me, I didn't know what to do. I was frazzled. It was helpful to have this outside organization, kind of hold my hand and, share with me that the journey is, it's long, it's winding. It's definitely not a straight line, but you can learn from people who've gone through it. I was able to learn from, kids in the queer community, and kind of anticipate what was coming up. Be ready for things that I had not experienced before. So especially for parents and caregivers, I do feel like that's a really great organization. And if you don't have one in your area, if you're in a rural area, you can start your own. Just saying, there have been like 40 or 50 PFLAGs launched just this year, because
Wow.
of the current administration. So just throwing that out into the universe.
Yeah, and when you've talked about your own journey as a parent supporting your child as well, and I think what you just said is a real testament to that journey, from reaching out to PFLAG as an organization to help you during the early days when your child just came out, to now where you're the president. So yeah, there's the journey is long and winding, but it does seem like you can get to a really great place and then help others who are at the beginning of there. So thank you so much for sharing that, Farah. And I put a link to PFLAG in the chat as well. And then Francesca, I wanted to go to you and see if, I know that you've mentioned a lot of resources that came out of this report specifically, but if you want to mention those again, and we can add some links in the chat too.
Yeah, I would love to highlight our resource guides. So the first one being for families, the second one being for tech and social media companies, and then the last one is on the way. And it's going to be for active allies. So really anyone who, just underscoring the point that everyone can play a role regardless of your affiliation or your connection to the community. But the reason why I recommend our resource guides is not just because they highlight some of the findings from our report and some of the recommendations that we've collected, but they also include, each of them include 6 other trusted organizations, like including PFLAG, who are doing this work that can be helpful, whether it's for parents or family members or tech and social media companies. And they were also created alongside young people. And one of my favorite parts of our family resource guide is that section of what to do if you make a mistake. And that section actually wasn't included in the original draft. When we brought the draft to our youth advisory board and asked for feedback, they were like, yeah, these resources are great, but we don't expect our parents and our family members to be perfect, and we know that they'll mess up. Can we provide some sort of guidance of what to do when that happens? Because sometimes that conversation is really awkward. So I love our resource guide because some of the best ideas on them really came from the young people.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it goes back to how important that youth engagement is in every step of the way, including the reporting. So thank you so much for that. And I saw that we've posted those links in the chat as well. So we have some really good questions rolling in. So just to wrap up this discussion before we move to that audience Q&A, I just want to ask like a key takeaway question. What advice do you have for LGBTQ plus young people navigating the online world today? And I want to pose this to all 3 of you, so anybody's welcome to start.
I can jump in.
Yeah.
I would say think critically. With everything you interact with, you have to ask yourself, is this a positive thing? Is this good for my mental health? Be safe on the internet. If something doesn't feel right, it probably isn't right, and don't think that you know that you owe anybody on the internet anything. But also, I mean, on the other hand, know that there is community out there. If you follow the things that you love, follow what interests you, even if you don't have community in your in-person life, just by pursuing your interests on the internet, you'll be able to find people with those same interests and you'll be able to find that community.
Yeah, we gave a webinar over a year ago where somebody talked about how she was obsessed with Hamilton and none of her in-person friends were. So she went online and had a whole like Hamilton, I think like WhatsApp chat or something like that. So like we've been talking about, you can find your interest in your people out there no matter what they may be as well. So thank you so much for sharing that, Dylan. Fran or Farah, do you want to go next?
Yeah, Dylan, you actually took the words right out of my mouth. I was going to talk about social media literacy skills, which is exactly what you mentioned, thinking critically, leaning on your discernment. Those we can't control all of the content that's online, but with those types of skills, you can set up guardrails for yourself and with the help of trusted adults, to find spaces online that feel supportive.
Yeah, and those skills, I think it's again, it's like flexing a muscle in terms of thinking critically, and the hopefully the longer you're online and thinking critically, the easier it becomes. But I think that's another area where parents and caregivers can come in as well, and help with developing those critical thinking skills, because that's certainly something that comes with age too. So thank you for sharing that, Fran. And then Farah, we'll go over to you.
Sure. I mean, I think I would take it from a parent perspective in terms of helping your child be safe online. Yes, absolutely, all the resources of social media, knowledge, and um, thankfully our school district actually had a really good social media training program. So our kids really knew from a very early age, kind of like very basic safety, but they were able to, of course, expound upon that as they got older. And then as a parent, just, really honestly keeping an open line of communication and really genuinely knowing in your heart, like, um, uh, you know, being very non-judgmental about what may come at you from your child, because your child is learning and growing, and they're going to make their own mistakes, and you're going to make your own mistakes at responding to them. But always coming back around and being like, I see you, I see where you're at, I'm where I'm at, let's work through this together, and let's keep talking, like just keep the communication open. That would be my advice.
Yeah, I think that's another theme of this webinar is communication is really everything, and keeping that open is really important as well. So we have just about 10 minutes left. So I'm going to shoot into some audience Q&A before we wrap up. So we're actually going to go a bit offline for this question. And for young children, what strategies can we use to help them feel belonging at school when they are so different and non-conforming to gender roles? So this audience member said, my son is very young and I'm struggling with classmates saying hurtful comments about his girl-like hobbies. So if anybody has any advice to give there, I'll open the floor.
Um, yes, I have many friends who have children who are incredibly non-conform. My own child. I mean, just the runs the gamut. And I think it is more difficult at a young age because kids are much more just what you see and working with what they know, which is very limited. I think I would see, honestly, I would see if you could talk with the teacher directly first. If that doesn't work, then the admin. If that doesn't work, launch it up to the superintendent. But it really is a process of um, getting in touch with the teacher, talking about what's happening in their classroom. They might not be aware of it, but they're the first person. They're basically the front line when it comes to this kind of behavior among the children in their class. So, and definitely send the email so that you have date and time stamped, um, you don't want to call it evidence, but yeah, it's evidence of like when you got in contact with the teacher, if the teacher was receptive, if the teacher was not. So that way, if you do have to escalate, you have the proof. Having children in a public school district, this is what I have found has worked well. It is a test of patience, but it is worthwhile to help your kid just feel more comfortable being themselves.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Farah. And hopefully teaching that tolerance young will help in the long run for everyone involved as well. Um, Another question from the Q&A. Do you all have thoughts on how to talk about healthy boundaries with online content slash sharing of information? That is a rising concern for our community as hate has become memeified. So I'll pass that over to anyone who wants to answer.
Yeah, I think that's a really important question. Um, Thoughts around how to talk about healthy boundaries with content and online sharing. I do defer back to talking about social media literacy skills and what that actually means. So part of that is talking about how to identify misinformation or disinformation or hate speech online and having open and frequent conversations about that. Um, and then also part of social media literacy is moral and ethical behavior and how to be a responsible young person or individual online that is sort of civically engaged and with the community in a way that's appropriate. So having those sorts of conversations, and then in terms of boundaries, if you're a parent talking about your own media use and sort of how that is helpful or not helpful sometimes to your mental health, can really model that for a young person in your life.
Yeah, Fran, you stole the thoughts right from my head, basically. Being a good digital role model is, I think, really important here too. And making sure, I think that goes for a lot of different parts of online safety and digital safety education, but just from when you are on your phone and how often you're distracted by your devices, down to what you are posting and what the adults around your child are posting as well. I think that's a really important piece to address too. Um, so this next one goes a little bit back to the research. So Fran, I think we might be coming back to you, but this audience member said, I am curious if the BTWF research has any info, anecdotal or quantitative, about LGBTQ plus youth being given access to social and other platforms prior to the stated minimum age in those companies' terms of service. So generally, as we might know, that's usually 13 plus, or on some potentially 16 plus as well. What do they know about the impact of youth 12 and under getting access before meeting the minimum age? So getting a little bit into that age assurance conversation as well.
Yeah, so our research actually didn't look at youth under the age of, I believe it was 14 was the start. And generally, we don't look at youth that young. However, I do know that more and more platforms are sort of creating guardrails around minimum age and also defaulting to policies where if someone is under the age of 16, for example, their account is automatically private. And I think those types of guardrails are really important. But on our end, we actually didn't look at this in our research. So yeah, I don't have anything to share there, but perhaps I'm not sure, Fair, if you have any more personal
I was, yeah, I could speak from personal experience, and we are in California, which is fairly inclusive. Let's just put it that way. So I understand that other states have different issues. What I would say is, definitely do the deep dive into your state's educational policies, see what is possible. For grades 1 through 5, I feel like elementary school, you do have to find something age appropriate because they haven't really, I think in California, they don't do sex ed until 5th grade anyway. So you do have to make sure it falls in line with whatever your state's policy is. But for middle school here, they were able to at least start. I mean, and I also, there's lots of politics in our district, so that's a whole nother ball game. But they did start like kind of support group meetings at lunchtime, especially for I mean, it is the age is middle school. It's, what is it, age 11 through 14-ish. So that is a really formative time for children. It is a time when their brains are just growing by leaps and bounds, and they're trying to figure it all out. So I do feel like starting in middle school and then definitely in high school is when kind of the clubs and activities, you can work with a teacher, a fellow teacher who might be willing to be the advisor, and start that going. But it is, yeah, excuse me, it just depends on your state's Department of Education.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Farah. And I think that's an issue that we contemplate a lot is uh, kids potentially accessing these platforms before they're supposed to be on them, and how to combat that is something that I know we think a lot about it at FOSI as well. I want to end with one last question. I'm going to it goes off of what we were just talking about a little bit. This person is somebody who works at a school for grades 1 through 12. And they are also asking how to educate younger kids on these topics. So more as a whole, LGBTQ plus well-being, both on and offline. And I think the really interesting part of this question is, would you have benefited from this as a younger person, as this young student? And I think Dylan, if you'd like to wrap us up by answering that, that would be great.
I can definitely talk about that. I would definitely have benefited from something like that as a young person. I remember like when I was little, the first time I like read a book with a queer character in it, I was like, oh, like I didn't know that was like a thing that could happen. Just 'cause like I hadn't been exposed to it at a young age. And so I think that, if you're trying to like start an organization or something like that at your school, just focusing on like exposure to these things, like breaking down perceptions or stereotypes that kids may have been taught or learned, through their parents' behavior or through the internet's behavior. I think starting a group like based on inclusion or something like that would have been super helpful to me, just like on knowing like what the options are as you grow up. I think would have been super impactful for me. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, Dylan. I think that goes back to another theme of starting to have these conversations about online safety early and often, and also starting to have conversations around LGBTQ plus people and communities early and often as well is really impactful in the long run for everybody. So thank you so much for sharing. I think that's a really great point to end on as we've been talking about the wonderful journey that is this topic as well. So I'm just going to quickly wrap with some closing remarks. Thank you so much for your time today. Thank you to all of our panelists and also the people working behind the scenes logistically to help this happen as well. If you have any additional questions for any of the panelists, you can reach out to FOSI or the Born This Way Foundation, and we'll be sure to answer them. I'd also like to thank each of our panelists, Fran, Dylan, and Farah, for an incredible discussion today. Thank you all so much for coming, and enjoy the rest of your day. I know I certainly learned a lot, and I hope you did too. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you so much.